Hey, it's Dr. K. I'm a California licensed naturopathic doctor and certified sacred medicine woman. Welcome to the Divine Woman Wellness Podcast. This is a show about whole body wellness that is going to support you in finding alignment with your body, mind, and spirit. I believe every woman should have a deeper understanding of her body and soul, and my mission on this show is to guide you through learning about your body, how you can shift your day-to-day life to support health and wellness while connecting to yourself on a deeper level. These episodes are rooted in naturopathic medicine, vitalism, biohacking, and mysticism, and will guide you towards well-being in body, mind, and soul. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves. Welcome back for another episode of the Divine Woman Wellness Podcast. And I know it's been a week. Actually, I am recording this episode the same day I recorded the last episode. And if you're watching any of the videos, yes, I'm still wearing the same clothes. Yes, I really love my shirt. No, I'm not wearing it every time I record my video or my podcast. So this is just something that has been coming up for so many of my patients lately. And I simply just didn't want to wait to record another episode on a different day. So you're getting multiple messages recorded in one day, delivered in multiple days, so bear with me. Today's episode is actually all about electrolytes and minerals and all these things that so many of my patients are deficient in, where it makes such a drastic difference to their quality of life. I can't even begin to explain how many patients I've been seeing, and much more recently, but especially over the last couple of years, where they're coming in with these severe neurological deficits, these symptoms of weakness. We're trying to rule out ALS, MS, these very severe neurological conditions. And when I look at their labs, they have very frank deficiencies. And sometimes they're a little bit hidden, and you just have to know to look in the right place. But things I'm seeing, they are there on very standard blood work for the most part. So a couple of recent cases that I have this one patient, I have so many patients, but this one in particular where they came to me with what seemed to be neurological Lyme manifestations, and there's definitely that layer to it because obviously they have Lyme, they have neuro Lyme, that is a thing. But here's the thing, the symptoms they came to me with, even though there's a lot of overlap with the neuro Lyme, when I looked at their labs, I got really suspicious of like, okay, wait, is this neuro Lyme or is this actually a very, very important mineral deficiency? And in this case, it was a potassium deficiency. And for a prolonged period of time, their potassium, so excited, I can't speak. Their potassium was frankly low. That means below the reference range. And they kept being told, definitely not the potassium, definitely nothing wrong with you. Everything looks great. And they had had so much workup by so many amazing doctors. They've been followed very closely. And nope, sorry, nothing we can do. So again, it was dismissed as neuro Lyme, which again, there's definitely that component because when our body's depleted, it can't work right, including the immune system, to get things under control. But in this case, I do strongly believe that all of their symptoms were exacerbated by this potassium deficiency. And we're talking about difficulty getting through the day, difficulty walking from the computer around their home, driving was difficult, cognitive function was difficult, everything was difficult. And probably what it sounds like to me is like moving through molasses on a daily basis. Nerve pain, muscle weakness, and I already mentioned the cognitive dysfunction, but those were symptoms of low potassium. And so it's taken a really long time now for us to get to the right level because there were other things going on as well that made it hard for their body to absorb that potassium. And obviously there have been other progress in their health as well. So I don't want to dismiss that. But what I see is as their potassium level is improving and coming up, their symptoms are getting drastically better, which is amazing. As the potassium gets low, because we haven't been bringing in the electrolytes or doing the things we need to do to keep the potassium up, the symptoms get worse and exacerbated. And there's always a very direct correlation. So now they're on higher doses of potassium, but they're at least in the normal range and getting close to the ideal range. And the closer they get to the ideal range, the more stamina they have, the more they can do the cognitive function stuff, the more they're back working, they're much, much better. Huge improvement. Still not a complete resolution. There's definitely still a lot going on, but that is one example specifically where it was written off as one thing, neurological, in this case, Lyme, but it was written off to the neurological realm when it was actually a very important mineral deficiency. Now, these minerals are important for nerve conduction. I don't know how much of a background you guys have on what's necessary for the nerve impulses to transfer, but there's sodium and potassium and chloride. Those three play a huge role in nerve conduction. Okay, so when we're missing those little pieces, do we think we can run electricity through our body? Impulses from the nerves, do we think they're going to fire? Well, no. Another case came to me recently that was actually, again, a neurological manifestation, and this time of low sodium. And this patient of mine, work up by so many clinicians, so many neurologists, just being passed around the medical system, and just nobody could figure out what's going on. They had a toxin panel done. Yes, there's definitely a high toxin burden, and that needs addressed. But nobody had acknowledged or done anything about a low sodium level. Sodium, one of those three that we need for conducting nerves. We also need that sodium, potassium, chloride to regulate the fluids in our body. So not to mention that. But she was having severe manifestations. Now, I've only seen this patient once. We haven't had a follow-up. But the symptoms that they were having it's textbook. I read off symptoms of sodium deficiency to her, and she's like, I have all of those. And except for coma and death, because that's very severe sodium deficiency. So thankfully we were not in that range yet. I literally sent her home to go get the electrolytes into her system. We don't need a detox. I mean, we do need a detox. First things first, get the sodium levels up. Other patients, I see a lot of missed anemia. So this is another one that I am going to talk about today. And it's not just iron deficiency anemia. So what a lot of people do not understand is anemia can happen with so many different nutrients that are deficient. Iron deficiency anemia is only one type of anemia. A lot of clinicians will run a CBC, a complete blood count, to screen for anemia. And what we're specifically looking for is H&H, hemoglobin hematocrit, and then red blood cell production. If those are normal, fine, no anemia. At least that's what's conventionally taught. Functionally, I look at them within the reference range, and if they're trending on the low side normal, I'm definitely suspicious of anemia. But now here's the thing. Your body, and this is for all minerals, all nutrients, your body is always going to try to maintain homeostasis, kind of the status quo within the bloodstream. Because if that's off, everything else is off. Okay? This is like your supply chain. We cannot run, if we see deficiency in the bloodstream, we've had deficiency for a very long time. So what I've been doing, I don't know, I can't even remember, probably since I've been in practice for the most part, but especially within the last couple of years, because I'm seeing this so much more, I actually run an anemia panel, which looks at more than just a complete blood count, so I can get a better idea of what's going on for the patient. And most of the time, their red blood cells, hemoglobin hematocrit is totally fine. It's even functionally still relatively fine. And the anemia panel that I run includes folate or B9, B12, and a complete iron panel. A complete iron panel looks at free iron, total iron binding capacity, percent saturation, which is, how many receptor sites are bound. Total iron binding capacity is how hard your body's trying to get iron into the system. And then ferritin. Ferritin is your iron storage molecule. Now, ferritin's a tricky one. And this is why I run all of them, so I can get a better understanding of what's going on. Ferritin could be elevated with inflammation. So sometimes ferritin looks okay, but iron actually is depleted, which is why I run all the factors. So I can look at them as a comprehensive picture. Now, a marker that is not commonly run in anemia or even in an anemia workup is copper. So over the years, I've seen a lot of treatment-resistant iron deficiency anemia. What that means is the person is identified as iron deficient, therefore anemic. They take iron, nothing ever gets better. Their numbers don't go up, they don't feel better. It kind of maintains like a feeling of, okay, nothing changed. This type of anemia is very responsive to copper supplementation. Now, again, it's really important. Make sure you look at B9, folate, and B12 because those are also important in utilizing the iron. Again, that's another good reason why we want to look at the actual amount of iron and the whole iron panel. But something I run consistently in people, especially if they're treatment resistant or numbers don't make sense, is I look at a red blood cell and serum copper level so I can have a better understanding of that. Copper deficiency is another one of those manifestations that can result in very severe neurological dysfunction. So from the level of difficulty with the thinking, the brain fog, right? But also pain, lethargy, weakness, your nervous system starts to break down in its function. So it's like you're cutting off the oxygen supply to the nerves. We all know that that doesn't go well, right? So it is so important when people are anemic or not feeling well or have this heaviness to do a full workup. So what I do in this case with the treatment-resistant anemia, well, I don't even say iron anemia, just a treatment-resistant anemia, is start supplementing copper even while we're waiting for the results to come in, because a lot of people, especially since we've had COVID, since the pandemic, and even cold and flu season, a lot of people have been supplementing with a lot more zinc. Zinc and copper compete with one another, so you can have and you can create a zinc toxicity that then depletes your copper stores. So there's a lot of people where I'm seeing more anemia that is not an iron deficient, B9 or B12 deficiency anemia, but rather it is a copper deficiency or insufficiency type anemia. And especially because this can become quite severe, it is really important to screen as early as possible. Now, copper deficiency anemia is one that I definitely suspect when I see normal iron levels, relatively normal B9, B12, but then a really low ferritin. What made that ferritin low? Well, what are the other cofactors that we need to make red blood cells? So copper being that one. And it's generally a good idea. I always look at copper, zinc together. If you just look at one, you don't know what the other one is doing. Sometimes we can have both a copper and a zinc deficiency. We can have an overall mineral deficiency. It is so important to check everything. And I know it's really difficult to get labs sometimes, especially if you're in an HMO type system, but it's okay. Be persistent, understand, educate yourself, and there are providers out there. There are a lot of concierge practices. There are ways we can order labs online. So if you have any questions, drop in my DMs. I'll see if I can connect you with anybody or give you some information on that, because it is so important to run comprehensive panels. Now, the thing I want to point out is we talked about 2 labs so far, the Comprehensive Metabolic Panel, the CMP, which looks at sodium, chloride, potassium, and calcium, which is one we haven't talked about yet. But it's so important to have that run. And that's one that everybody runs. Most doctors run a relatively comprehensive metabolic panel. And then the CBC, a complete blood count. Out of those 2, there's a lot of information there. Now, the complete blood count, yes, I did go in a little bit more depth in actually doing an iron panel. But again, these are very standard labs. Even copper and zinc can be done relatively easily. Now, another nutrient that I see that is deficient in a lot of my patients, especially the ones that are a lot more conscious about their health and the food that they put in their system, is iodine deficiency. So I see a lot of hypothyroidism. I actually see a lot of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, actually a lot of autoimmune thyroiditis. And I always screen about iodine levels, because especially with autoimmune thyroid, it is important to know where those levels are, because if you have too much and you give iodine, that's going to cause a flare. If you're insufficient in iodine and you take or you give somebody iodine, usually that goes really, really well. I've had a great response, and most of my patients are reversing or getting into remission their Hashimoto's or their autoimmune thyroiditis. There are a few other things we need to do in order to get that to that point, but iodine supplementation can be safe if you know what you're doing and you're following the data. So the other thing that I want to point out is that iodine is necessary for making thyroid hormone. So when we're iodine deficient and suddenly we want to make thyroid hormone, we can't actually make it. So we use 4 pieces of iodine to make T4, which is the precursor to the active thyroid hormone T3. So we actually literally take this molecule with 4 pieces of iodine and we go clip, we take one off, and now it's actually a T3, which is your active thyroid hormone. That can come in one of 2 ways. It can become the active T3, or it can become a storage form reverse T3. And the difference there is which iodine gets clipped off, and there's some other factors that can impact which way it goes. Most of it should be going to active T3, which we measure as free T3. Now, if we can't make T4, because we're iodine deficient, our TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, on average is going to go up because we need to push harder on the pedal for the body to release adequate amounts of thyroid hormone. Think about it this way. If your car is getting low in gas, we all know it doesn't run as well, but if you're getting really low, you might have to depress that gas pedal a little bit more to get that little bit of gas that's left going. The TSH is like that gas pedal. You're pushing it harder, like, hey, please, make some thyroid hormone. I really need it. And we don't want that number to go too high. So I always screen for iodine. And it's, sorry if you guys can hear that. That's my dog. She's got an itch. Okay, so I always screen for iodine deficiency in all of my thyroid patients. And in the last year, I probably have just screened iodine levels on everybody. I've had one person so far since I've been practicing and screening iodine, one person with an excess of iodine. And I will say probably 80%, rough numbers here, 80% of my patients who were iodine deficient. Most of those 80% were actually clinically hypothyroid. Some of those were subclinically hypothyroid and had some other symptoms of iodine deficiency. For women, that actually can include estrogen dominance and breast tenderness as a symptom. So back to the iodine. It is so important to screen for iodine. And you can be iodine deficient and still have adequate, great amounts of TSH, like balanced TSH and thyroid hormone. We're just running out of supplies. And I wouldn't want somebody to fully run out of supplies before. Don't wait for something to be dysfunctional before you fix it. These should be annual screens, right? Making sure that you have adequate amounts of these nutrients. It's like Legos. If we're trying to build Lego castles and we're running out of Legos, are we going to make really nice Lego castles? No. We might start using some other, maybe duplex. Maybe we'll use some different brands. I don't know. We'll make it work. But is it going to be as great and symmetrical as it should be? Can we get to the same size? Can we build them the right way? Probably not. We're probably going to improvise a little bit. Now, the thing I didn't mention about anemia is that we actually need iron to make thyroid hormone. So iron is such a critical player in so many systems within the body, okay? So you may have adequate amounts of iron, but if you're anemic, your thyroid's also going to struggle, most likely. We need all the different kinds of Legos in different sizes. So that's important. And there are other nutrients that are important for thyroid function. We'll talk about those on an episode specific to thyroid. But in terms of nutrient deficiencies that create symptoms that get missed so often, iodine is one of them. Another one is vitamin D. Vitamin D is very critical, and we learned throughout the pandemic, and we understand with other viruses as well, that if our vitamin D levels are low when we get sick, our body has a harder time getting over that illness. And with COVID, there was actually a lot of research showing that the lower your vitamin D levels were when you got COVID, the worse the outcome was. Vitamin D is important not just because it is a precursor to your hormones, but it's also an important player in the immune system. So it's really important we have adequate amounts of vitamin D. When I say adequate, I don't mean tippy-toe over 30, because that's the bottom of the reference range. This is where we're going for a functional range between 60 and 80. And that is really, really important. Over 80 is not good either. So this is one of those Goldilocks nutrients where we want to ingest the right amount. Vitamin D deficiency can cause depression. Vitamin D actually stimulates the serotonin receptor gene to express itself. So it works like an SSRI, which is very interesting, I think. And it has some components within the MOA mechanism, but MAO mechanism of action, but the MAO. But I don't remember those off the top of my head right now, and I don't want to misspeak. But it does have, as we know, antidepressant effects, especially when you are deficient. We need to boost it. This is the whole premise behind the seasonal affective disorder. Vitamin D levels dip in the dark in the winter. Mood dips as well. So vitamin D is very important for mood and mood stability, but did you know that vitamin D is actually important for your sleep as well? So vitamin D deficiency is actually associated with insomnia. Okay, so I'm going to let that settle in. Please don't take your vitamin D supplementation before bed. That actually will be stimulating and will make sleep more difficult. Take your vitamin D in the morning with a fatty meal and then let it do its magic throughout the day. Now, low energy is another sign of vitamin D deficiency potentially. And this is why obviously doing a proper intake, but also making sure we run the labs and treat the right thing is important, right? Because fatigue can be so many different things, but vitamin D is one of those do not miss. Now, vitamin D is also related to calcium and calcium metabolism, and in conjunction with vitamin K, all of those are really important in your bone health. So this is for my women, and guys too, actually. This is for everybody. We need vitamin D to bring in the calcium from the gut, and then we take vitamin D in conjunction with vitamin K2, and we deliver it into the bones. When we do not have vitamin D to bring the calcium in from the gut, guess where your calcium comes from? Yep, you guessed it, from your skeletal system, including your teeth. Your body's going to maintain homeostasis in the bloodstream as much as possible. So you may have a totally normal calcium level, which I generally say ideal range is around 9.5 on that. It may be normal. It may even be high because your body is dumping calcium out of your bones. So it's so important, especially for anybody with osteoporosis or osteopenia. Get your vitamin D levels checked and then do the proper supplementation. Work with your provider so that you're getting the right levels. Now, calcium is another important nutrient that I think is just kind of written off. We look at it for bone health, but even then, is it roughly in the reference range? Okay, cool. And that's the end of that. Calcium is actually also important for muscle contraction. So I've seen low levels of calcium as well as potassium cause some irregular heartbeats, some chest pains, more cramping in the legs. Both of potassium and calcium can cause those same symptoms. And calcium deficiency, again, bloodstream's going to stay status quo as much as possible. So it's important to take that into consideration. If your calcium is starting to drop over the years, over the time, if you maybe had, say, a 9.9 and then eventually a 9.5, and now 5 years later you're at an 8.9, Houston, we have a problem again, and I worry about your bones. So it's really, really important to look a little bit closer at your calcium levels. In terms of other nutrients that I see deficient commonly, well, I think those are the top ones. So your base electrolytes, essentially, the sodium, the chloride. I don't see chloride low very often, but definitely sodium, potassium, calcium, vitamin D, iodine. Those are the most common ones that I see. And then iron, well, along with iron, and then copper. I do see some zinc deficiency, and especially there's a couple of places we can look at that functionally. Zinc deficiency in the last couple of years hasn't been as much of a thing. Again, a lot of people have been supplementing with a lot of zinc because it's so effective against viruses. I'm just seeing a lot less zinc deficiency. But the other nutrients that I've just mentioned, they have kind of just stayed the same, if not gotten worse over the last couple of years. So A couple thoughts behind why. So the copper we already dove into, really high levels of zinc, supplementation, iron. People are cutting out meats that may actually be necessary for their health. Now, I think it's really important when you're choosing to eat meat and animal product that you are obviously making ethical choices, but also making sure it's grass-fed, grass-finished, ideally regenerative agriculture as much as possible on all foods. We want to avoid toxicants, and obviously we don't want to destroy the planet any further. Regenerative agriculture. So if you're not eating meat because you're afraid it's going to make the ozone layer worse, actually, regenerative agriculture creates carbon sinks, which means it takes the carbon that's not great in the air and puts it back into the ground. And we use farm animals like cows to do that when they're left to graze correctly, when we're not feeding them on grains. That is a huge soapbox of mine, a little bit of an aside, but a little nugget. So if you've stopped eating meat for health reasons, but specifically for environmental reasons, maybe think again, and your health should always come first. So make sure you get a good quality animal product that you're bringing in. Now, on that note, I also see some iron excess, and this is again why it's important to understand your body, look at your nutrient status, and make correct choices. Now, the other nutrients alongside iron, so this is B9, B12. We didn't talk about coenzyme Q10, but copper and zinc, we actually find those in organ meats. So I generally like to use some ground beef that actually has some organ meats ground into it. I love Perennial Pastures here in California. They're wonderful. They have an ancestral ground, which that way you don't have. I don't love cooking things, especially like heart. I've gotten over cooking liver. I make a great liver pate now. But for the, daily or weekly use that we do have our animal protein, I make sure and use an ancestral ground. So I get all those nutrients because guess where they're found? They're in the animal products. Now there are great sources of iron, B12, like all these nutrients we can get from a plant-based diet. And if you're going to ask me what is the right diet for me, I'm going to refer you back to my episode where I discussed which diet is right for which person. To sum it up, it really depends on your makeup. Where are you from? What are your genetics? What is your physiology? What do you need right now in this moment? So checking your labs is really important. Now, the other electrolytes, so sodium, chloride, potassium, and iodine, actually, we'll lump them all together, is when people are trying to make healthier choices and we're drinking a lot of filtered water, which is great because our water is just sad and toxic nowadays. We want to have that filtered water, but evolutionarily speaking, we evolved with mineral water, spring water, water that was abundant in minerals. So now we're drinking very, distilled water even, which is completely devoid of any nutrient, micronutrient that is, and so we're actually flushing these nutrients out of our body. So you may take this filtered water and drink it, and if you're like me, if I drink filtered water, I probably have to go pee within as soon as I swallow, I'm like, okay, I got 2 minutes and I gotta go pee. And that's because you have no electrolytes in the water to bring in the water into the body, right? The electrolytes pull the water into the system. So if you're drinking distilled or filtered water, it does the opposite. It's actually going to cause an imbalance because it's flushing out the minerals. The water is pulling the minerals out of the body and then you pee it out. So I work with a lot of women or even guys actually. It's come up a lot. I have a really small bladder. I'm constantly peeing. I limit my water intake. As soon as I take a sip, I have to pee. And you know what we do? We remineralize the water, and then they come back. They're like, it's amazing. It's like the best magic trick on the planet. Because now they're drinking the water. They're getting hydrated. They're feeling better because their brain's working better. Water, we're mostly water. Yes, we are a lot of water and electrolytes, so things are going where they need to go. Our brain functions much better, so we feel brighter, more vibrant, we're detoxing better, and we're not peeing constantly. So if your urine is constantly clear, you're probably drinking way too much water to begin with. There should be just a slight little yellow hint. Potentially, it should be straw colored is the proper term for that. Straw to slightly clear, but if it's clear, there's no color to it, your body can't concentrate it. You're probably overhydrating with water, underhydrating with electrolytes. Now, because of this, what and I'm going to credit my kids here. They found the most amazing electrolytes on the planet. I absolutely love them. I love my kids, but I love my electrolytes too. This was a random farmer's market find where my kids are like, hey, can we try this? And I'm like, oh, sure, whatever. It's another sweet thing we're going to try. Fine, whatever. And I honestly thought it was a lemonade stand. That being said, sorry, Malcolm. I really did think you were a lemonade stand for a minute, but Malcolm is the very nice person that's introduced me to these electrolytes. And my kids love them. And then we had this great conversation how they were developed for athletes and they're really clean and they don't have any sugar in them really. And I tried them and oh my goodness, game changer. I now recommend them to probably all of my patients. I'm pretty sure I have my colleagues hooked on them by now because they taste great and they don't have a ton of sugar in them. They're very basic. They don't have any food coloring in them. Really no junk, which is what I love about it. And it doesn't taste overly sweet. And again, you can make it a little bit more dilute if you like even less sweetness. I don't do a lot of sweet. So for me, it's just the right amount. They're so simple to use. You plop it in your water, you shake it up, you drink it, you call it a day. Fresh citrus is my personal favorite. My kids love Concord grape. And there's red raspberry, there's lime blueberry. There's so many flavors, really. Like, try them all. I kid you not. They also make great popsicles for the kiddos. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is I drink a lot of filtered water because I avoid the toxicants. And ever since I've started using these specific minerals, I've been feeling so much more hydrated. And I do notice a huge difference in like my energy levels. And I haven't run my own labs. I'm not the best at checking up my own labs. That being said, I can feel a difference. So these, I haven't even mentioned the brand. Oh my goodness. Superieur Electrolytes, and you'll definitely find a link down in the caption for those. I really, really love them. They're just wonderful. What was I going to say? Oh, they do have some organic rice syrup solids in there. I just can't ever say that fast. So I think that's probably like the one ingredient that if you're on an autoimmune paleo or if you're avoiding rice, obviously that's not going to work out as great. Although I have had some of my more strict AIP patients or my more sensitive patients try them and they have not had a problem with them. It does have stevia, so I get that a lot from my patients like, oh, I don't like stevia. Honestly, guys, hey, I really dislike stevia. I can taste it in all the, yeah. If something has less sugar in it, it has stevia in it as a replacement, I can't do it. This has a smidge of stevia in it, and it honestly tastes like a leaf of stevia, not an extract. So it makes a big difference. It tastes really good. And I really can't do stevia. And a lot of my patients that say the same thing, once they've tried it, they're like, you're right. It actually tastes really, really good, and it's super refreshing. And it's so versatile. During the summer, popsicles are a great idea. You can't go wrong. So it's amazing. But my point being here, we are electrolyte deficient because we are filtering our water, especially if we're healthy. Now, the superior electrolytes don't have iodine in there. So with iodine, obviously, most people that are really health conscientious are avoiding iodine. And by avoiding iodized sea salt, which I'm not a big fan of iodized sea salt, it's sodium chloride. It's artificial, essentially, right? It's just sodium chloride. That's it. I do recommend using Himalayan, Celtic sea salt, real salt for all their minerals. And you could honestly just take a pinch of any of those and put it in your water. It is remineralizing, but you're not going to get your iodine. So the best thing to do is if you're avoiding iodized sea salt, actually start eating seafood. So seaweed is a really quick and easy snack. My kids love taking it. I take it to work. You just get those little packets of seaweed. You can buy the big packs, cut it to size. That's a great way to incorporate iodine-rich foods and really any seafood. Doesn't have to be seaweed, shrimp. Things that are pink in the ocean are higher in iodine. But it is really, really important to make sure you get those iodine sources in on a regular to protect your thyroid, but it's also anti-infective, right? So we do know that, right? That's why surgeons use it to clean off surgical sites. And if you're ever wondering if you're iodine deficient and your doctor is not willing to run an iodine test for you, what you can easily do is just put a drop and draw like a square on your forearm and just observe how long it stays. If it absorbs within a few minutes to just a few hours, you need it. And you can supplement that way too. Your body will take in what it needs. If that little orange square stays for a prolonged period of time, and I usually say over 5 hours, or it's still there the next morning, you have more than enough iodine. Your body did not want any of that. You're not going to create a toxicity with that. It's a very small amount. It's usually around like that little square that is like a drop or two. That's the RDA is 150 micrograms. The one that I use is around 150 micrograms per drop. So you just look at that. With one square, you're not going to cause any toxicity, even if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And that is a really, really easy way to supplement if you're nervous about it, is just put a teeny little drop on your forearm, wrist, and see how fast it absorbs. If like a sponge, you need it. Okay, do it more often. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap the episode for now. Those were a couple of nutrients that I see that can cause some very significant neurological presentations when they're deficient. And the one thing I didn't talk about is specifically iron. Iron is really important for oxygen carrying capacity in your red blood cells. We understand why that's important. We need oxygen, but iron is also really important for mitochondrial function. It actually directly plays a role in what's creating the cellular energy within the mitochondria. So if we're iron deficient, our mitochondria are having problems, everything downstream is going to have a problem. That's an easy way to sum that one up. So again, these nutrients are in some very basic lab panels that most doctors are willing to run. I will try to recap the nutrients and actually write down some of their ideal functional ranges for you. Maybe I'll create a handout for you guys. I always love making handouts. So maybe we'll find a goodie down below that you can download for your reference to ask and coordinate with your provider, but also then for you, once you look at your labs, you can actually look and see, are things in the functional ranges and what do I do? So obviously, if you're deficient, discuss it with your medical provider. So this is not medical advice. We all remember this is all educational. So for today, I hope you have a beautiful day, and I can't wait to record the next episode. Much love. Ciao.